The highway never really slept. It just slowed down. After midnight, the sound of engines faded to a low hum. Trucks rolling somewhere far off, the occasional car cutting through the dark like a single note in a song that never ended. The gas station sat at the edge of town, where the streetlights thinned and the fields began. Its fluorescent lights burned all night, humming faintly, their glow turning the pavement pale and unreal. Moths circled endlessly around the bulbs, tapping at the glass like they were asking to be let inside. And beneath the far pump canopy, a dog slept. He was old, not sick, just tired in the way that comes from too many summers and winters in the same place. His fur was the color of rainwater and dust, a patchwork of gray and brown. One ear folded at the tip, the other stood half crooked. He'd been there for as long as anyone could remember, though no one could say who he'd belonged to first. The locals called him Rufus, though he didn't answer to much of anything anymore. He lay on a patch of concrete warm from the day's sun, head resting on his paws. Every time a car pulled in, he'd lift one eye. Not to beg, not to bark, just to watch. Once he was sure the driver wasn't anyone he knew, he'd close it again and go back to whatever passed for sleep. Inside the small office, Marlene Carter, the night clerk, leaned on the counter with her chin in her hand, watching the security monitors. The blue glow painted her face the same color as the walls, tired, electric, and a little sad. She glanced out the window every few minutes, checking on the dog without meaning to. "He's still out there," she muttered, mostly to the coffee machine that gurgled in response. She'd tried to take him home once, a few winters back, got him as far as the parking lot before he'd slipped out of her back seat and trotted right back to the station. After that, she stopped trying. The lights buzzed overhead. The clock above the cooler hummed softly, its second hand stuck between two ticks. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, faint, unconvincing. A pair of headlights cut through the dark. A truck slowed, turned into the lot. The sound of gravel and brakes echoed through the empty night. Rufus opened one eye again. A man climbed out, young, maybe 30, with a face half hidden by road dust and stubble. He left the engine running and walked inside. "Evening," he said. "Barely," Marlene replied. He grabbed a bottle of water and some jerky from the rack, then paused by the window. "That your dog?" She shook her head. "He's everyone's and no one's." The man smiled faintly. "He looks like he's waiting for someone." "He is," she said. "Been waiting years." The man nodded as if he understood, then dropped a few bills on the counter. "Keep the change," he said. When he left, Rufus lifted his head, watching him go. The man stopped, crouched, and held out a hand. The dog sniffed at once, tail giving a single slow wag. The man smiled, then stood, climbed back into the truck, and drove off. The red taillights faded into the black horizon. Rufus lay back down. The night settled again. Still, humming, endless. Marlene turned off the coffee pot and stared out the window. "You'll be here long after me," she said quietly. Outside, the neon sign flickered. Gas and go. One letter half dead. The O in go, blinking just enough to keep the darkness back. Rufus shifted in his sleep, a soft sound leaving his throat. Not a growl, not a whine, just the kind of sound that comes from dreaming. The thunder rolled again, a little closer this time. But no rain came. And when the clock's broken hand failed to move for another hour, the lights above the station still burned, humming faintly, washing everything in that same pale glow that made night look like it would never end. The dog didn't wake. He just breathed, slow and steady, as the world moved around him, quiet, patient, and lit by lights that refused to turn off. The next morning came in pale and slow, the kind of dawn that didn't seem to notice itself happening. The highway hummed with the first trucks of the day, long, low engines that came and went like waves against an invisible shore. The sky was colorless, all gray and thin yellow, and the air smelled faintly of diesel and last night's rain that had never quite fallen. Rufus woke before the sun fully cleared the trees. He stretched slow and stiff, his joints cracking softly. His breath came out in little clouds. The neon lights above the gas and go sign still burned, buzzing faintly, their glow washing the whole station in a color somewhere between bone and blue. Inside, Marlene poured coffee that was already an hour too old. The first sip burned her tongue, but she didn't care. The habit mattered more than the taste. She glanced out the window, saw Rufus curl up again beside the air pump, and smiled. "You and me both, buddy," she said quietly. She had started leaving scraps for him years ago. Crusts, bits of jerky, the end of a sandwich. Lately, though, he ate less. Sometimes he'd just look at the food and rest his chin beside it. He wasn't hungry anymore. Just here. By 7, the trucks came thicker. A few drivers nodded at the dog as they fueled up. One even whistled, tossed half a breakfast biscuit his way. Rufus didn't move until the man was gone. Then he stood, sniffed at it once, and left it untouched. From the corner of the lot, the old Coke machine rattled and hummed. Its compressor hadn't worked right in years, but Marlene kept it plugged in anyway. It made noise, and noise felt like company. Around mid-morning, a small car rolled in. Old, dust-covered, its paint the dull blue of forgotten skies. A girl got out, maybe 25, maybe younger. Her clothes were neat but road-worn. She looked like someone traveling far enough not to care how she looked when she got there. She went inside, bought gas, and a bottle of orange soda, and when she came back out, she stopped by Rufus. He didn't look up at first, but when she knelt, he opened one eye. "You look like you've been waiting a long time," she said softly. Rufus blinked. She smiled, set the bottle down beside her, and ran her hand along his back. His fur was coarse, warm, and thin over the ribs. "There you go," she murmured. "Still here. Still keeping watch." Marlene watched through the window, her hand pausing over the register. For a moment, the girl and the dog looked like they belonged to the same stillness. Two travelers passing through a place that wasn't meant for staying. The girl stood, brushed off her jeans, and glanced toward the highway. "You should come," she said, half joking. "Lights like these will drive you mad." The dog didn't move. She smiled, gave a little wave, and climbed back into the car. When the engine turned over, Rufus lifted his head and watched her drive away until the dust settled. Marlene came outside a few minutes later, her apron still on, a mug in her hand. She stood beside the dog and squinted toward the horizon. "Another gone," she said. "Don't worry, I'm still here." Rufus yawned, stretched again, and laid his head back down. The sun climbed higher, but the lights above the station didn't shut off. They never did. No one could remember if the switch had even worked. The hum of the fluorescent tubes mixed with the low buzz of the vending machine, the steady rhythm of tires passing now and then. The day passed that way. Light that never changed, sound that never stopped. The same faint pulse of motion and stillness coexisting in the same small patch of asphalt. By dusk, Marlene leaned in the doorway, watching the orange fade from the sky. Rufus lay exactly where he'd been, eyes half closed. She took a sip from her mug and said, "I think you're the reason the lights never go out. Maybe they'd forget if you left." Rufus's tail flicked once. The night came slow, heavy with heat. The trucks started up again, their engines echoing through the emptiness. The neon sign buzzed louder now, fighting the dark with its tired glow. And when Marlene finally went back inside, turning the key in the door but not the lights, Rufus lifted his head one last time, looked down the empty road, and exhaled. Slow, long, steady, as if counting the miles of all the people who'd passed and never returned. Then he closed his eyes. The gas and go sign hummed softly, the O blinking just enough to keep the night from winning. And somewhere out beyond the road, thunder rumbled again, not nearer, not farther. Just there, waiting. The third day began with the hum of the sign. The sound never stopped, not even for a second. A low electrical murmur that filled the air, mixed with the smell of gasoline, and settled into the skin like dust. Rufus slept in the shadow of the ice chest near the wall. His breath came slow, his ribs lifting with a steady rhythm that matched the buzz of the lights above. The concrete beneath him was cool now. The night's chill had finally reached even this place that never truly slept. Across the lot, Marlene unlocked the store door, holding a paper bag of day-old pastries from the diner down the highway. She set it down by the register, then turned on the radio. Static, then a faint country song, the same one they'd been playing for years. When she glanced out the window, Rufus was awake, head lifted, ears twitching at the sound. "Morning," she called through the glass. "Still here, huh?" He blinked once, slow, and laid his head back down. By 9, the sun was up, but it didn't change much. The light outside was the same as the light from the station, flat, pale, buzzing with heat. Cars came and went, farmers in dusty trucks, salesmen in rental sedans, faces that didn't belong to the town. All of them stopped for fuel, a soda, sometimes a word or two with Marlene. None of them looked twice at the dog, except one. It was a man in a dark jacket driving a white pickup. He pulled in quiet, left the engine running, and stood by the pump for a long time before moving. His face was lined but not old, the kind of face that spent years squinting into the wind. When he finally looked toward the dog, he froze. Rufus looked back. His tail gave a single slow wag. The man's mouth twitched, like he was about to speak but thought better of it. He filled his tank, went inside to pay. Been driving long? Marlene asked, ringing up his total. Long enough, he said. His voice was low, rough. That dog out there, he been here long? Longer than me, she said, smiling. Why, you know him? The man looked down at the counter. Used to. Marlene's hand paused over the change. Oh, he nodded once. Name's Rufus. Used to belong to a friend of mine. Thought he'd be gone by now. Dogs don't forget where they belong, she said. He didn't answer. He stared past her, through the window. Rufus had stood now, stretching his legs, head turned slightly toward the man. The light caught in his eyes, and for a moment, they looked almost young again. The man's shoulders dropped. Guess some of us can't leave, even when we should. He took his receipt, turned, and walked back out. Marlene watched from the door as he crouched beside the dog. Rufus sniffed his hand once, then pressed his head against it. The man stayed that way for a long time, not moving, just resting his hand on the dog's neck. When he finally stood, he said quietly, You kept it, huh? Still waiting for him. The dog blinked, slow and solemn. The man nodded, climbed back into his truck, and drove off. Rufus stood for a while, staring down the road until the sound of the engine disappeared into the horizon. Then he walked to the edge of the lot, lay down beside the faded white line that marked the exit, and rested his head on his paws again. That afternoon, clouds rolled in from the west, heavy and dark, dragging shadows across the asphalt. Marlene stepped outside, wiping her hands on a towel. Maybe today, she said. You feel that? The air smelled like metal, sharp and clean. The sign above her flickered, one light sputtering as if nervous. But the rain never came. By evening, the clouds had drifted past, leaving behind the same dry air and the same hum of fluorescent light. Rufus had fallen asleep again, chest rising and falling in time with the steady buzz. Marlene watched him through the glass, her reflection faint in the window beside his shape. He's waiting for someone, she said softly. Aren't we all? The sky turned black, the sign's glow bleeding into the dark like a second sun. The wind moved once across the lot, just enough to stir a napkin near the pumps, and then it was still again. The world didn't change. The lights didn't blink. And under them, the old dog slept. The keeper of a place that never shut its eyes, where the road was endless, the air unbroken, and the hum of the lights made the night stretch on forever. By the fourth night, the air felt different, heavier somehow, as if the world was holding something back. The highway stretched black and endless, the horizon washed in dull orange from distant towns no one ever drove to anymore. The lights at the gas and go still burned. They always did. Their steady white glow cast long shadows that never shifted, turning the pumps into quiet monuments of rust and reflection. Rufus slept near the door, the hum of the neon sign above him a lullaby he'd long since stopped noticing. His breathing was slow, his chest rising against the cool concrete, his tail occasionally twitching when he dreamed. Marlene sat behind the counter, her chin resting on her hand. The night was still. No customers for an hour now. The radio had gone to static, and even that had started to sound like comfort. She looked up at the clock. The hands were stopped again, somewhere between 2 and 3. They always jammed around that time. She had given up fixing it. She turned toward the window. Rufus hadn't moved. His fur caught the faint green of the overhead light, making him look like something carved out of shadow and memory. Hey, she said softly, voice barely above a whisper. You still dreaming, old man? He didn't stir. She smiled. Yeah, I guess we both are. The hum of a truck engine rose in the distance. The sound came slow and deep, growing louder as headlights curved off the highway and into the station. A semi, white cab, long trailer, rolled to a stop by pump 4. The door opened. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a hat that looked older than the truck. His boots crunched on gravel as he approached the window. Marlene straightened in her chair. "Evening." "Evening," the man replied, voice rough, like gravel dragged across stone. He paid for fuel in cash, no words wasted. But as he turned to leave, he stopped and looked down. The dog. He crouched, one hand brushing the edge of Rufus's fur. The dog didn't wake. "This one yours?" the man asked. "No," Marlene said. "He just came with the place." The man nodded slowly. "Looks like he's waiting on someone." She looked away. "Aren't we all?" The man smiled, tired, polite, then stood and went back to his truck. The engine coughed once before settling into a low rumble. He filled his tank, climbed in, and drove off, the red taillights shrinking down the road until they were swallowed by the dark. The station fell silent again. Marlene stepped outside, pulling her jacket tight. The night was colder than before, but the air smelled different, cleaner, faintly metallic. She looked up. The clouds above were thick, low, and full of motion. "Rain," she murmured. Finally. A single drop hit her hand, leaving a cold circle on her skin. She looked down at Rufus. "Hey, you feel that?" But the dog didn't move. She crouched beside him. His breathing was slower now, soft, faint, barely there. She rested a hand on his neck, warm but shallow. "Don't you go anywhere now," she whispered. Not yet." The first drops began to fall, scattered and uncertain. They hit the metal roof of the pumps, the concrete, the sign, each one sparking a small, distinct sound that filled the quiet. The smell of wet pavement rose up like a long-forgotten memory. Marlene stayed there, hand resting on Rufus's back, feeling the rain soak into her sleeves. The neon lights reflected on the wet ground, breaking into streaks of green and white. The gas and go sign flickered once, twice, and for the first time in years, one of the bulbs went dark. The hum changed pitch, softer now, less certain. Marlene looked up. "Huh," she said softly. "Guess you were right." Rufus's tail twitched once, slow, like a final acknowledgement. His breathing eased, long inhale, long exhale. Then still. Marlene stayed kneeling beside him, the rain falling harder now. She didn't move until the puddles reached the curb, until the hum of the lights was nearly lost under the sound of water. By the time she stood, the world smelled alive again. The highway gleamed wet under the reflection of passing headlights. The sign above the station still glowed, though half its letters had gone dim. Gas and go, now just A's and G, flickering in the rain. Rufus lay peacefully, the rain washing the dust from his fur, his body half reflected in the shallow water pooling at the base of the door. Marlene whispered, "You can rest now. Someone else can keep watch." And when she looked up at the horizon, she saw it. Faint lightning behind the clouds, followed by a slow roll of thunder. The storm was finally coming. The lights buzzed once more, then steadied. And in that strange, quiet moment, as the rain began to fall in earnest, the world outside the gas station finally looked like it had learned how to sleep.